Hi everyone, I'm Chyill and welcome back to another detailed champion guide. Today I will be talking about the newly released champion, Blossom, the Forest Mender. So sit back, relax and enjoy the show. Blossom is a ranged support champion who excels in supporting her team with a host of strong utility spells and healing abilities. Blossom has access to some versatile utility abilities that will be sure to annoy some enemies that you face when playing Blossom. While her basic healing abilities aren't the strongest, I think that she has some strong Battlerites choices that really helps with boosting her power over the duration of the match. I think the same can probably be said for her damage potential as well. Depending on the Battlerites you pick, she can either do alright damage or quite a decent amount of damage if you hit your charge shots well. In terms of control, she has some good and consistent control abilities in addition to her utility spells, so I think she's really quite a fun champion to play. Even though she is listed as a beginner-friendly champion, since her abilities are mostly quite straightforward, I think that she could potentially also be a high skill cap champion because her abilities actually have the potential to be used quite creatively by more experienced players. So yeah, I think she'll be relatively easy to pick up, but it might be a bit tougher to fully master her kit. Before we start, just like the other champion guides I have made previously for Pestilus and Jumong, to name a few, I have split this guide up into different sections and have included timestamps directly to each section in the description below. As usual, feel free to skip ahead to the section that you need if you've already watched the video before. And again, we'll start the guide off with looking at Blossom's abilities before we talk about her playstyle, strengths and weaknesses. Then we'll look at her Battlerites options, and finally we finish off with some of my gameplay tips and potential combos when using Blossom. And so without further ado, let's begin. First off, let's talk about her abilities one by one. Blossom's Mouse 1 ability is Thwack, and this is her basic attack. What it does is Blossom will throw an acorn which deals some damage to the enemy it hits. When the weapon is charged, which it will be every 6 seconds after the charge attack has been used, the acorn that Blossom throws will deal double damage and it will also snare the target for 40%. Pretty amazing for a basic attack ability since it is damage and control all in one, so pretty sweet and simple I would say. Next up, Blossom's Mouse 2 ability is Nourish, and this is her basic healing ability. Just like most other heal abilities in the game, the heal will heal the nearest ally in the targeted area. In addition to the direct healing, the Butterfly's buff is also applied on the target, and the target will receive some extra healing over time. Pretty simple. Moving on, her spacebar ability is Hop, and this is Blossom's main movement ability. What it does is that Blossom will hop to the targeted location while avoiding attacks when jumping. When she lands, she gains invisibility, 20% increased movement speed, and it also removes movement impairing effects. The eye icon doesn't appear for the enemies when Blossom is invisible, so it helps a little bit for her survivability since it keeps the opponent guessing more. The moment she uses an ability, the invisibility will fade, so be careful with that. As Hop is Blossom's only movement ability, you'll need to use it wisely since you don't want to be caught out of position with the ability on cooldown. Next up, Blossom's Q ability is Tree of Life, and this is her main AoE healing ability. The way it works is similar to Pestilus's Q ability, and what it does is that she will put down the tree at the targeted location, and upon putting the tree down, nearby allies are healed for a bit, and they will continue to be healed over time as long as they remain within the area. Pretty sweet. The tree itself has its own entity, so it can take hits for you just like Pestilus's Queen ability. However, Blossom's tree sapling isn't as sturdy as Pestilus's Queen with only 20 HP, so it will only take about 2 hits for enemies to kill. Nevertheless, it is still useful for blocking hits occasionally. Next up, Blossom's E ability is Boom Bloom, and this is another one of her damage and area control ability. What it does is Blossom will throw a seed after a short delay, and this seed will deal some decent damage to the target before it attempts to stun all enemies in a medium-sized area around it after a short delay. The ability is pretty useful since it will still try to stun enemies once the seed has reached its maximum distance, regardless of whether it hits an enemy or not. Therefore, this allows you to deny areas from enemies while sacrificing some potential damage with it. I suppose you might need to weigh up the pros and cons before committing to such a play though. Ha! So those were Blossom's abilities which didn't require energy. Now let us move on to those which do. Starting with Blossom's R ability, her R ability is Gust, and it is a 25 energy ability where Blossom summons a conal gust of wind in front of Blossom that pushes enemies away while reflecting projectiles back toward the enemies. This gust of wind looks like it covers a very large angle, but in reality it doesn't cover as large of an angle as it is showing, so just be careful with it. The ability is pretty simple, but its effects is very powerful, since it is very versatile and very direct. The moment you see an Ashgar charge up his mouse 2 and commit to it, just press R and reflect them back at him. Haha. Next up, Blossom's first EX ability is a shift spacebar ability, Tag. The ability costs 25 energy, and what it does is that Blossom will cast for a short while before she dashes forward in the targeted direction. The enemy she comes in contact with will be dealt some decent damage and will be knocked back by Blossom. After knocking the enemy back, Blossom gains invisibility, increased movement speed, and movement impairing effects are also removed, just like the normal spacebar ability. Because of the cast time, the ability isn't that great to be used when in a tight spot, and so it is mostly just useful for keeping enemy melee champions away before they get close, or it could also be used for damage I suppose. So I guess in some ways it's quite versatile as well. Personally, I mostly use the normal spacebar ability since it is a better escape tool in my opinion. Moving on, Blossom's second EX ability is a Shift Q ability, Forest Sanctuary. What this ability does is that Blossom will plant a tree at a targeted location just like her normal Q ability, but this time instead of healing allies in the area, this tree absorbs all damage dealt to all allies in the area. The tree has 50 health, and so it can absorb a considerable amount of damage before it disappears. Furthermore, it can even absorb the death vortex damage in sudden death, so I think it is super useful in those situations as well. This tree ability is a massive lifesaver in a lot of situations, and so I think it is a really strong ability. Its only downside is that it doesn't do any healing, so Blossom still has to heal up allies within the tree if she needs to, but I don't think I should complain too much about such a strong ability already. Finally, Blossom's ultimate ability on the F key is Dance of the Dryads, and what it does is that Blossom will jump into the air, briefly avoiding all attacks before she lands and starts to channel the ability. 3 waves of energy are shot forward one at a time, and each of this wave does pretty significant AoE damage since it can pierce through enemies. The enemies who are struck are also inflicted by the weakened debuff, so their healing and damage output will be dampened for a few seconds. Pretty sweet. While the ultimate ability is super strong if it goes off in the perfect scenario, I think that it can be countered quite easily since those waves are considered projectiles and can proc enemy counters. Furthermore, Blossom is still pretty vulnerable while channeling it, so do be careful when and where you decide to cast it as Blossom. And so that's about it for Blossom's abilities. Now let us move on to her playstyle, strengths, and weaknesses. Blossom's playstyle, as with most supports, is a little bit more of a passive one. While she can occasionally be a bit more on the offensive side after snaring someone with a charged Mouse 1 attack, I think that she excels the most when she plays a bit more defensively and try to make full use of her utility spells like her Shift Q and R abilities at the right time and place. In my eyes, she has this true support feeling to her since that's what her abilities allow her to do. Unlike supports like Odur, who is a control machine who can pretty much control the battlefield to his liking and stuff, I think that when playing with Blossom, the emphasis should be on supporting her teammates while they attempt to do maximum damage on the enemy. So what this means is that when she's not trying to find a good time to use Q, Shift Q or R, whether it be on her teammate or on herself, she should be trying to use her charge attacks and E abilities to disrupt enemies for her teammates, or using her Mouse 1 and Mouse 2 abilities as necessary to damage and slow enemies or to heal allies. Her spacebar ought to be saved for escaping, or perhaps if you are a bit more ambitious and the situation calls for it, then her shift spacebar can be used for some damage or knockback too. Even though I put quite a bit of emphasis on supporting teammates, if and when it eventually comes down to some sort of 1v1 on one side and another 1v1 on the other side instead of a full 2v2, then sure, by all means use anything you can to win that trade and survive. At the same time, do try to make your way back to your teammate since Blossom really shines the most when she has an ally with her. And so that's what I think her playstyle should be. Now let us move on to some of her strengths and weaknesses. Starting with Blossom's strengths, I think that one of her strengths is her ability to protect her team with her Shift Q ability for a few seconds. Her being able to use her Shift Q every so often, as long as she has enough energy, is I think a very powerful thing. Because while she and her team are being protected, their skills are cooling down and it's sort of just like taking a break for a while and then going back into the fight again, but with most of your abilities ready. During that time, you don't have to worry about damage for a while, since you're likely to be healing the tree while waiting for your cooldowns to reset. This is assuming, of course, that your teammate knows to come and join you under the tree as well. Moving on, I think that another strength of Blossom's is her versatility. I think that she is very versatile because her Shift Q and R abilities really give her a lot of options to deal with a multitude of scenarios. For example, you can use R to reflect projectiles, or to use it to even push away melee enemies. You can use it to also push it into your teammates' AoE attacks too, and that's why I think it is quite versatile. Not only is she very versatile because of her abilities, I think she's also versatile because of her Battlerites options. Most of her Battlerites are all pretty strong in their own way, and so I feel that she can adapt pretty well to all sorts of compositions, which is a massive plus in my eyes. And finally, I think that she's quite strong in dealing with pressure as well. When under pressure from enemy champions, putting a shift Q down is a massive lifesaver, and it really gives Blossom and the team some time to think of a way of dealing with that threat, to sometimes shift the battle into their favor instead. Her R ability is also pretty good at turning tides as well, because it can reflect almost everything thrown at her back towards the attackers, making them back off a little bit. Just putting a gust up for a few seconds will usually stop most aggression for a while for this reason. So yeah, I think she can handle pressure quite well. Moving on to her weaknesses, I think that one of her weaknesses is that she lacks a bit of direct healing. While she does have the heal over time aspect included in her heal, her direct healing of 11 feels a bit lacking compared to other healers. I understand that her healing synergizes with some of her Battlerites, and so it shouldn't be too strong, but up until that point where you can actually get the Battlerites that helps her healing potential, she might be struggling a little bit when trying to top allies or herself up. In the unfortunate cases where her normal tree from her Q ability gets killed almost immediately after being placed down, I feel that Blossom is at her weakest and it can be a bit tough to heal up the incoming damage in such a position. Next up, I think that another one of her weaknesses is a slight lack of damage. While she does have okay damage from the charge attacks, her E ability, and perhaps a shift space ability if you're not using that for escaping, I feel like her damage feels a bit lacking unless you can reflect enemy projectiles back at them, or you're really good at hitting every single charge attack and following them up with non-stop hits with her mouse 1. Even if she manages to hit every single mouse 1, the rate at which those mouse 1 do damage just don't feel very impactful to me. For a character with no hard CCs, I think giving her a little bit of extra damage could be okay, like maybe her mouse 1 doing 11 damage instead of 10 perhaps is what I think, but I guess we just gotta see how it plays out for now. After all, I don't really have any reliable statistics on anything about her, and these are just my observations. Finally, I think that Blossom is also quite weak against melee champions, although she does have some pretty good escapes from them, like her gust ability pushing them back, or her shift Q acting as a damage blocker, or her spacebar being her best escape ability from these pesky melee champions. I think that she can't cope as well against multiple melee champions ganging up on her. She really doesn't have too many options at that point, since her only real escape cooldown being her spacebar ability isn't enough to save her all the time. Her other abilities doesn't work so well at melee range either, and so I think she can be brought down quite easily by melee champions. While she can deal with pressure quite well when she has a shift Q ready, it only lasts for so long before she will get overwhelmed, I feel. Not to mention that her R no longer blocks melee attacks as well, as she once could when she was first released. And so yeah, that's about it for her playstyle, strengths and weaknesses. Now let us move on to Blossom's Battlerites options. Once again, you can pause the video to slowly read through every single Battlerites if you wish before I go through my thoughts on her Battlerites, since it will take a long while for me to read it all out for you. And so pause now to read them all. Okay, now that you've read them all, let's continue. In the first tier, I think it will mostly be a choice between Hop and Skip and Powerful Pitch. Gift of Nature seems to be a Battlerites focused at defending yourself against melee champions, but personally I think the double space bar provided by Hop and Skip achieves this better since it is more versatile. Furthermore, the stun from the Boom Bloom Seed in Gift of Nature doesn't really count for much when you're trying to run away anyways. Against multiple melee rush comps, I typically take Hop and Skip for the survivability it provides. When against ranged or support targets, Powerful Pitch gives a lot of value since it not only reduces the target's damage and healing output, but it also makes your charged mouse 1 attacks deal 25% more damage. If you think you can survive against multiple melee enemies even without Hop and Skip, then Powerful Pitch would be your best choice all around. Moving on in the second tier, I think that all three Battlerites choices are very good choices. If you picked Hop and Skip in the first round, Nature's Presence value is pretty good since you have a much higher uptime of the damage and healing buff. Spring Growth is really good for your damage potential as Blossom, especially if you pick Powerful Pitch in the first round, so if you feel you need more damage, then Spring Growth is a pretty good choice. If you neither need the damage or the buffs from Nature's Presence, then Helpful Bark would be the best bet since it drastically improves your healing capabilities. The increased initial healing is so good, and the extra health on the tree makes it that much more likely to survive for quite a bit longer for those sweet extra healing. Definitely a solid Battlerites pick all the time, unless you need Nature's Presence or Spring Growth specifically. In the third tier, I think that all three choices are pretty okay too. If you didn't take Hop and Skip in the first round, Cautious could be a good boost to your survivability if you feel you need it. That 1 second's extra invisibility should help you to gain more distance from your enemies, so that's pretty useful. If you took Helpful Bark in the second round, then Refreshing Seed is a decent pickup. Since now your tree has 32 health, it will have a higher chance of surviving and eventually giving you the haste buff when its effects ends. Outside of those two specific situations, Puff is a pretty good overall pickup since it gives you a bit more extra damage potential and it also gives you an extra knockback to deal with melee enemies. Typically, I just go for Puff since I don't have to worry about putting my tree down with Chyill to block enemy projectiles with it. In the 4th tier, I think that all 3 choices are good once again. Bountiful Tree is a really good Battlerite for AoE heals, and so it can be pretty worthy pickup in 3 vs 3s. In 2s vs 2s, while it is still good, I feel that it might be a bit easier to just run with Kind-Hearted since it is good all the time, instead of only when there's a tree down. Fluttering Grace can be a pretty good choice for when you need the extra movement speed to deal with some melee champions, so that's an okay pickup as well. My personal preference is Kind-Hearted or Bountiful Tree for all the extra heals, since Blossom lacks a bit in the healing department without them, I feel. Finally, in the 5th and final tier, it will be Healing Stream like all the time pretty much. It is too good not to take because of the healing that it gives to Blossom and the teammates. Growing Power is a bit too inconsistent since Blossom is susceptible to being stunned or interrupted, so the full value of it is hard to achieve. The healing from Healing Stream is always good, so definitely pick Healing Stream. And so yeah, that's about it on Blossom's Battlerites. Now let us move on to some of my gameplay tips for playing Blossom, as well as some potential combos with her. My first tip when playing Blossom is to stick to your teammates as much as possible. Blossom is a champion who is much weaker alone, but super strong with a teammate because of her ability to support the team as a whole with the trees and gust ability. So definitely try sticking to them as much as possible, and you should have a much better chance of winning those rounds. Next up, another tip I have for playing Blossom effectively is to pay attention to her charge attacks. Admittedly, I'm not very good at doing this yet as well, since I'm not used to ranged characters having charge attacks, and I just spam away whenever I'm not really doing anything. But if you can, try to pay attention to those charge attacks being ready or not, and try to make full use of it. It is sort of like Pearl's charge attack, where you really want to make use of its effect, since it really makes a difference over the long run. Those increased damage and slows adds up, so definitely don't waste them and try to get used to its cooldown so you get a feel of when it is ready. Moving on, another good tip with putting down your shift Q is to put the tree a little bit behind you and your team relative to your enemies. This way it will be harder for enemies to target it directly to bring it down, and so it can protect you and your team for longer amounts of time. It is also easier for you to heal it directly since your melee teammates will not overlap with the tree, hence making it last longer as well. If you have the Bountiful Tree Battlerite, you and your team are pretty much unkillable until they somehow bring down the tree or until it expires, so I'd say it's a pretty good strategy. The only downside to this is that you can't use the tree to block projectiles for you, and so you'll probably still suffer whatever side effects that those projectiles do to you should you get hit, even after the damage is nullified by the tree. So yeah, those were just some tips to help you with playing Blossom. Because she doesn't really have proper combos, we'll skip that section. On to teammates, I think that Blossom synergizes well with ranged teammates more so than melee teammates, and the reason for this is that the tree only has a limited range, and so it is easier to put the tree in a position where it can benefit herself and her ranged allies who are near to her. Furthermore, she doesn't have to chase after melee allies to try to heal them or put a tree down far away from herself to save them, which could in turn compromise her own safety. So yeah, most ranged champions should go well with Blossom. If you want to narrow it down further, I think ranged champions with very good damage potential can work even better with Blossom since it complements Blossom's slight lack of damage a little bit. Ranged champions like Jumong, who may find it tough to deal with melee pressure, could be a good teammate for Blossom too, since Blossom's shift Q can really take that pressure off of Jumong just a little bit more. With all that being said, I am not saying that melee teammates aren't very good, but you may have to follow them a little bit more closely with Blossom if you want to keep up with them basically. And so overall, I think that Blossom has quite a fun playstyle, and she really has a lot of potential because of how powerful and useful some of her abilities are. When played right, her and her team should be able to outlast enemies just as long as they know how to play around Blossom's strengths. Because her playstyle is way more support orientated than even other supports, adjusting to a playstyle may take some time if you're not used to playing a support role. Even having said that though, I don't think it should be too hard to learn the basics of using her anyways, since her abilities are relatively straightforward. And so yeah, that's about it for my Blossom guide. I hope you found it useful. As you may know, the next guide would be a serious guide as a result of a previous poll some time ago, and so you guys can look forward to that guide coming out in about 2 weeks time. In the meantime, if you want to vote for which champion guide I will do next after serious guide, you can do so by clicking the I button at the top right now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please subscribe to the channel, like it, comment on it, share this video, and you can check out my other videos too if you haven't already. Thank you very much for watching my video, and until next time guys, have a great day, keep gaming, stay chill, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.